So Donald Trump wants Greenland, and after what we saw in Venezuela, we know that he's not the kind of man to ask for permission, and he's certainly not the kind of man to ask for forgiveness. So what does this mean? Does this mean that he could actually trigger a world war? Is he going to war against Europe? Is he going to war against NATO? This is what we're going to try and break down in this video. It's very interesting to me, though, as a journalist, to watch global media use words like acquire. Trump wants to acquire Greenland. I mean, to be fair, it's not something on sale, on Fifth Avenue in New York that he can acquire. How can you actually buy, sovereignty of another country? People are refusing, or at least maybe a little hesitant to use the word invade, but is that a real risk of what we're looking at? On Monday, Trump pushed openly at acquiring Greenland. And he said that he's made a tangible offer to Denmark and Greenland. And he said, I'm quoting, "I haven't done that, but Greenland should make a deal. Greenland doesn't want to see Russia and China take over." And then he said the Greenland's entire defense is 2 dog sleds. And he claimed that Russia and China have destroyers and submarines all over the place, and the US will not let that happen. He added that said, if this affects NATO, and it affects NATO, they need us more than we need them. Give us Greenland or we'll take it anyway. He said we're going to do it the hard way. We're going to do it whether they like it or not. So what all of this means, we're going to break up now in this video. Remember, please like, share, and subscribe, and sign up for our membership to support my team and me so we can do more of this work for you, and we can add in more details, maybe do better edits for you as well. We can do all of that if you buy the membership and support us. Okay, getting straight to it. Let's first understand Greenland, right? It is the world's largest island that's not a continent. It is 2.2 million square kilometers, so roughly about 6 times the size of Germany. It's quite large. In fact, there was one visual I saw where you could pick up Greenland, and if you placed it on top of the USA on the map, it takes up the whole, height from Canada to Mexico. That's the size of Greenland, at least in height. It's covered by ice in 80%, and it has only, though, 56,000 people, mostly indigenous people of that land. To give you an idea, Bandra West, which is half a suburb, has about 1.7 lakh people. So just give you like a comparison of what those numbers are like. Most people live only on the southernmost, westernmost coast, which is closest to Europe, in the capital or around the capital Nuuk. And large tracts of Greenland is just ice and, the odd scientist, really. Greenland's economy is mostly fishing, plus it receives annual subsidies from Denmark. It's self-governing, which means that it controls all of its own domestic policies and its natural resources. Nobody tells Greenland what to do with its resources. Denmark controls foreign policy, defense, and overall finances. And both Denmark and Greenland have said very clearly that Greenland is not for sale. And I still don't know how anybody else's land can be up for sale, but this is what we're talking about. The people of Greenland will decide their own future. Now, let's take a look at why Trump is so interested in Greenland. Now, if you look at its location, it's right in the middle of North America on one side and Russia on the other side, and the Arctic. Now, it's been very crucial, especially during the Cold War, because it's that bridge literally between North America and Russia. And even though Greenland looks like it's very far north, the Earth is not a perfect sphere. So the shortest path, really, the Great Circle route between Russia and the United States, goes over Greenland. And if you want to detect or potentially stop ballistic missiles coming from one or the other way, Greenland is prime territory. Now, like I said, during the Cold War, it became really interesting for the US, and they have bases there. They had initially there was a plan to place nuclear missiles there, but that plan was abandoned. And there is one base, it's called the Pituffik base, and it's used for missile warning, missile defense, and space surveillance. So that's already in place. But when the US, during the Cold War, actually brought up the idea of placing nuclear missiles there were engineering issues, and Denmark objected strongly. The second reason, and this is the sad reason, makes me sad, the ice is melting in both the North and the South Pole. So this is the North Pole, the ice is melting, and our world leaders instead of finding ways to keep the ice from melting, are actually finding ways to make money if and when the ice finally melts. So 90%, remember, of global trade moves by sea. A massive chunk of that 90% of global trade that's moving by sea is just oil and coal, fossil fuel moving from one end of the earth to the other. And we know that that is something that the US is so deeply interested in. Now, with climate change, with the ice melting, you will actually be able to move ships through the Arctic, which we were not able to do right up till now because it was largely frozen. Now, when the ice melts, the Northern Sea route and the Northwest Passage will open up. So to give you an example, if you wanted to send a ship from Europe to Japan, it would have to move about 13,000 miles through the ocean. The Northern Sea route, once the ice melts, will drop that to 6,000 miles. That's a lot of money saved on shipping, and Greenland will then become a gateway. Controlling it will become about controlling the future map of world trade. So that's the second reason Donald Trump is interested. The third reason is also mining. I know anyone interested in the environment right now is having their heart broken all over the place. There are rare earth minerals in Greenland. Once that ice melts, it will give you access to things that have been frozen for millions of years. Uranium, iron, scientists believe significant oil and gas reserves. So scientists have been telling us that the further you drill down into the ice in the Arctic, there's ice that has been frozen for millions of years. So beneath that, there will be a lot of fossil fuel. There will be a lot of rare earth minerals, like we've done another video on it, about how everything you use in modern day that requires a battery, like your laptop, your phone, your electric vehicles, all of those need rare earth minerals. Some estimate 50 billion barrels of oil and gas. Now, will the leaders of the world who are now in their 70s and their 80s drill in the Arctic? Yes, they will, because climate change is not their problem. Climate change is a young person's problem, so they don't care about the mess that they're going to leave behind. Donald Trump is the flag bearer of actually drilling. He's given permission right now to drill in Alaska, in what is a Arctic sort of wildlife reserve for whales and polar bears that was untouched up till now, but he has now granted permission to drill for oil there as well. As the ice melts, these resources become more and more accessible. But Trump has been repeatedly saying that we want Greenland for national security and not for minerals. And we've seen world leaders through history, every time they want to do something that's ethically questionable, they'll say it's about national security. It's about keeping my own people safe. It's also the argument that was made in Venezuela. It's also the argument that was made before America marched into other countries that they had no business marching into. Is this really about Russia and China? Let's take a look at that, though. Trump has repeatedly said that Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships. That is a gross overstatement. Experts disagree with that framing. According to Arctic experts, according to much of the material that is available, it is likely that there are Russian submarines in the Arctic region, but there is no significant surface fleet all over Greenland. China has research vessels in the Central Arctic Ocean. China and Russian military exercises happened close to Alaska, but not close to Greenland. So there is a geopolitical competition between these three entities, and that is real. But the idea that Greenland will be taken over by China almost immediately if US doesn't move is an exaggeration. And we know that this is the kind of language that Trump uses. Unlike world leaders that we're used to listening to, or American presidents of the past, his words, his statements are not specific. They're all superlative. The biggest in the world, the best in the world, this is going to happen immediately, this is all over, nobody knows this better than me. So it becomes very difficult to challenge him, because everything he says is so overstated, that to simply say that China will take over Greenland, like I said, is an exaggeration. So Trump is framing it as a security emergency, which is why he needs ownership. Because right now, America already has a base, and that's been there since the Cold War, which means what do you need ownership for? But he's making it seem like an emergency, which is why he needs ownership. And that's possibly because of all the yummy mining and the trade routes that will soon be available. Now let's ask the important question. Can he actually do it? Can he actually annex, invade, slash acquire Greenland. And this is where it gets serious. Now, let's go over the different options available to the White House. Option number one, buying Greenland, which I still can't say it with a straight face. How do you buy somebody else's sovereign territory, right? This is not the first time Trump is trying it. He's tried it before. In 2019, during his first term, he offered to buy. Denmark said no. Greenland said no. Now he's offering again. In fact, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that officials are actively discussing an offer to buy. And Secretary of State, who is their sort of foreign minister, Mark Rubio, reportedly told lawmakers that Trump prefers to buy rather than invade. So, I mean, just these words are all threats, right, to Greenlanders. Option number two, pay Greenlanders to push for their independence. And this is the interesting part. Now, we've heard this before, that reports have come out of the White House that they're discussing payouts for Greenland residents, that each resident will get $10,000 to $100,000 per person. So that's in Indian rupees about 9 lakhs to 90 lakh rupees per person. Why? Because since 2009, Greenland has a right to secede from Denmark if its population votes for independence in a referendum. So if the people of Greenland say, we don't want to be part of this deal with Denmark anymore, we want to be independent and free from Denmark, they can choose to do so. And so what US is trying to do is to pay them money to influence them to make that decision and move themselves away from Denmark. And once they do that, then they become free game. And remember, at 100,000, which is the upper end of that deal, at $100,000 per person, it is $5.6 billion, which is not a lot of money for US if you consider the barrels of oil and the mining and the shipping that they could control in return. And finally, the option of a soft takeover option, which the US has done in other areas, in Marshall Islands and a couple of other places, where they come in and they offer to handle defense and security in return for economic assistance. Greenland could stay sovereign in name, but security and strategic control would tilt to Washington. And that would also likely acquire, in order for them to do that, Greenland will have to vote to separate from Denmark first. And finally, and this is the last option, marching in and using the US military. In Trump's own language, he has called it the hard way. He's not ruled it out. No one in the Trump administration has ruled out this possibility. Now, even though Denmark has a presence and there is some sort of defense available in Greenland, it would not stand up against the US military at all. So if the US decided to march into Greenland tomorrow, they would be able to do it like that. There would be very little to stand in their way. Let's actually examine if the US has actually discussed this with Greenland before. Apparently, this is not a new idea. Back in 1867, the US then Secretary of State, one William Seward, discussed acquiring Greenland and Iceland. In 1910, there was a three-way land swap idea that was discussed. In 1946, US President Harry Truman offered Denmark $100 million in gold for Greenland. All of those were rejected. And so there is no, that deal has not come about now for over 100 years, but the US is not giving up. The most important thing that we should discuss at this point is what do the people of Greenland want? Because it is their land and they're indigenous. So these are not European people like Trump has said, just because they landed a ship there 500 years ago, the land doesn't become theirs. Which is interesting. I want to take a pause there because this is exactly what American people, the white Americans, argue about that land. They landed a ship there 500 years ago and they call themselves pilgrims, and now they claim that land and they took it away from the indigenous people who were already, the Native Americans who were already living there. The Inuit people they're indigenous to Greenland. This is their land. And it's important to ask what they want. Now, there was a poll that was done by a Danish newspaper which said that 85% Greenlanders have rejected joining the US. So there's some sort of split opinion about whether or not they still want to be with Denmark, but they definitely don't want to be with the US. Another poll in the US says that only 7% Americans actually support any sort of military invasion of Greenland. But Trump is pushing that very unpopular idea then on both sides. I do want to talk to you about NATO because remember, this has come up a couple of times. Greenland is not a member of NATO itself, but Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is a member of NATO. And so if the United States attacks Greenland, it is attacking Denmark. If it attacks Denmark, it is attacking NATO. And there is a structural problem. Now, let me take you sidestep, okay, for a second to just explain NATO if you don't know NATO already. What is NATO? So NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This actually came about after World War II when parts of Europe were at war with themselves and they decided that they need to find a way to no longer fight with each other, because if France is constantly worried about Germany and Germany is constantly worried about France, they'll never be able to progress. So they found a way, the idea of the European Union, to come together, share resources, and thereby prevent warring against each other forever. The other idea that came out of it was NATO, where basically they come together to defend, all of them defend each other with one sort of entity. And it's a political military alliance of 32 countries in Europe and North America. It includes the US and Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Denmark, and others. They have a core promise in Article 5, and that's the most important line in NATO. An attack on one NATO member is treated as an attack on all. So if anybody attacks one NATO member, they will all collectively respond. Basically, they will defend each other. Article 5 has been invoked only once after the 9/11 attacks. Next question, who funds NATO? It's commonly funded. They have a headquarters, they have staff, they have a common structure military budget, they have shared bases, they have airfields, they have fuel pipelines, and NATO commonly says it has common funds of about 4.6 billion euros, I beg your pardon. And this is what each of its members, sort of contribute. And from that, they actually fund NATO, but each country also funds its own military, its own weapons, and its own defense budget. Does the US, as Trump has claimed in the past, does it pay for NATO entirely? No. US is the largest and the most powerful member of NATO, but it does not fund NATO alone. NATO has common funding, and the US contributes a share of about 16% for certain years. It does spend massively, though, on its own forces, its own bases, its own deployments in Europe, and its military capabilities that NATO benefits from. So basically, NATO doesn't have one single giant budget. It is a shared budget, and then 32 countries fund their own military. But the idea is that these militaries will actually never attack each other. They will always function as a front. And leading that front is normally the US. So what happens if the US attacks a NATO country? What happens to NATO? Will they all respond to the US? Can NATO respond to its own member? So Article 5, like I told you, said an attack on one member is an attack on all. But Article 5 also requires a unanimous agreement to invoke, which means that if, let's say hypothetically, NATO had to defend Denmark against the US, all members of NATO will have to agree to that, and the US is a member of NATO. So if the US is the attacker, then you cannot achieve that unanimous vote, and so you can never respond in that way. So effectively, if the US attacks a NATO ally, NATO will break apart. It will no longer exist. That is why the Danish Prime Minister has warned that a US takeover of Greenland will mean the end of NATO altogether, and European leaders have backed Denmark's position, including the UK Prime Minister, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain. They have signed a joint statement that says, and I quote, "Greenland belongs to its people. Only Denmark and Greenland can decide their relations." But I must point out that while each of these countries have individually put out these statements, NATO has been very quiet. The Financial Times report says that NATO has issued no strong public defense about Denmark's sovereignty. The Secretary General has been described as being unusually absent on this issue. European officials are rattled because it looks like the alliance is avoiding confronting Trump directly. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has reportedly said that NATO needs to initiate a serious debate, and EU officials are openly asking, if NATO cannot speak up when a member is threatened by another member, what is the point of this alliance at all? Can European leaders or NATO stop America in any way? Is the next question that we have to ask. They have options. One, remember, Trump has not, like when he did a military movement in Venezuela. He did not seek approval from his own Congress lawmakers, and that set several noses out of joint in America. So there is one way where Greenland and Denmark and other European leaders can actually lobby American leaders so they pull the plug on Trump's agenda domestically in some way. That's one option. Two, they can update security arrangements in Greenland. Now, Denmark keeps stressing that they already have a defense treaty. US has already expanded its bases and its military presence. So maybe they can do that. So they'll offer the US the ability to put more bases and more military in Greenland without sort of blowing up NATO in any way. They can boost Arctic security, more equipment, more exercises, more spending. And EU has massive market power, right? So could they do trade tariffs like Donald Trump has been doing on the rest of the world, block American investments, use trade as an anti-coercion instrument? Because Trump is the one who started that, using trade deals as a route to national security conversations. Is that possible? And is it possible also that the US will deploy more European troops in Greenland with Denmark and Nuuk's consent? These are all things we'll have to see how it plays out. Let's actually do one reality check, though, to figure out, is Trump bluffing? Because we've been asking this question for a year now. Experts have cited material to believe a military takeover is very unlikely. It's unlikely to happen because it's unpopular among US lawmakers. Like I said, domestically, nobody wants it in the US. It would alter American relationships with its allies. These relationships have been in place for decades right now. This is not something one president can blow up overnight. One assumes domestically within America, there would be voices that stand up against that. The US already has access to existing agreements that are already in place. Greenland and Denmark might even accept, like I said, a extended or a larger US presence in Greenland. So then why is Trump actually fighting for this? It makes for a wonderful headline. There's a possibility, one expert put it, that he's setting the news agenda and distracting from domestic problems. Is he distracting? Is Greenland a large island that he is using to distract from Epstein Island? Is it the Epstein files he's distracting from? Are they more domestic problems? Remember the ice shooting, of a US citizen has caused a lot of upheaval within his country. Again, is that something he's distracting from? Also, we know that Donald Trump likes a good piece of real estate, but this obviously feels like something bigger. The Arctic is becoming a strategic frontier as the ice melts. And this is the answer to the question that we have been asking for so many years, because with climate change and the ice melting and global leaders not showing any intent at all to do anything about it, this is why there's always money to be made. Shipping routes, minerals, defense systems, and power. And Trump's worldview has always been transactional. He's looking constantly at making more money. One of the questions that has come up is, if hypothetically speaking, none of the other options work out and Trump actually militarily invades Greenland, will it trigger a World War III? The most likely outcome is no. And this is why US already has military access via the 1957 US-Denmark Defense Agreement. A US military takeover would obliterate NATO politically and strategically. It would end NATO, and it's politically very unpopular. So the possibility of him using military coercion seems really slim. But even if he did, it's very possible that it would happen overnight quietly and without too much pushback from Europe. NATO would fracture. That's the number one risk. That's the worst risk, that NATO would fall apart. But the idea of a global war seems unlikely. And US and Europe would enter some sort of cold confrontation. There might actually be sanctions. Talks might break down. But the idea that there would be militaries that will move against each other seems to largely be unlikely. So this is where we are standing at right now. Europe and US confrontation, a historic rupture of the Western alliance. We don't know. Canada has not specifically said what it thinks just yet. Remember, geographically, Canada is also very interestingly placed in this entire argument. But what Donald Trump is doing, and as he has done since he took over office last year, is that he's taking a matchstick to all of the things that people took for granted about America for decades. He set all of the the trade agreements on fire last year and renegotiated everything with everybody and did so successfully. He has now moved to changing paradigms in terms of national security and in terms of the world military. But this is, I suppose, the interesting point of view that because of organizations like NATO, because of organizations like the UN, which gave other countries the semblance of a voice, the world has, in the Western Hemisphere, though let's call it what it is, the white world, or what they call themselves, the developed world, has allowed for one country to become so much richer, so much more powerful militarily than everybody else, that it is now in a position to threaten everyone, and nobody has the ability to stand up to them except maybe some of the large guys on this side of the world. So if America alienates Europe in this manner, where does that leave geopolitics? Where does that leave the idea of the white Western developed world? They've seen themselves as a united entity up till now. They will no longer be united. This will be completely new geopolitics that will play out. Is Trump willing to roll the dice on that? Or is he actually doing that, age-old negotiation tactic where you ask for the worst possible thing and then walk back to what you really want? And if what he really wants is shipping routes, mining, and a larger presence in Greenland. All right, leave me a comment in the comment section if you think Trump has gone too far or if you think this is actually a possibility.